Hello. The story I'm going to tell you today takes place in Wisconsin, 30th state of the United States, known widely for its cheese production. In Wisconsin, there is a city called Milwaukee. It is the largest city in the state and the economic center of the state. Milwaukee was voted the best city in the Midwest from the late 1980s to the early 1990s. However, during this time, more than a dozen disappearances occurred, all of whom were gay men. The police suspected that there was a serial killer in the area, but due to a lack of clues, they could not find the culprit until one day, two patrol officers accidentally uncovered a series of cases that shocked the United States. Next, we will go back to July 22, 1991. On July 22, 1991, it was a Monday. At 11:30 p.m., two police officers were on their regular patrol on the streets of Milwaukee when they came near an apartment building on 25th Street in the northern part of the city. Suddenly, they encountered an African-American man running out of the building, not wearing anything and with a handcuff on his wrist. He quickly ran straight to the two police officers and, in a panic, said, "Someone is trying to kill me." At first, the two police officers thought the man was a pervert and subdued him. But he quickly explained, "My name is Tracy Edwards. That night, I went to a bar to drink with two friends. During that time, I met another white gay man. He was very generous and offered $100 to invite a few people to his apartment, drink, and take some suggestive photos. But I was the only one among the three people invited who agreed to the arrangement. So, I followed him to the apartment in the building over there. When I walked in, I vaguely smelled a very unpleasant odor in the living room. There were some bottles of hydrochloric acid, and the TV was playing the horror movie, The Exorcist. I felt a bit strange and asked him about the acid bottles. He said the acid was used to clean the dirt off the floor. After a while of chatting, he handcuffed me. I know some clients have strange habits, so I didn't react much and asked him why he did that. He said it was his personal preference and hoped I could cooperate. After that, we went into the bedroom. Unexpectedly, the smell in the room was even stronger, and there was a blue plastic barrel in the corner. I guessed the odor was coming from there, but despite disliking the unpleasant smell, I still cooperated and lay on the bed to take photos. At that moment, he suddenly took out a knife, threatened me, and forced me to take off all my clothes. I suddenly felt that something was wrong, but with my hands cuffed, it was very difficult for me to escape. While taking off my clothes, I suggested he remove the handcuffs. Seeing that I was very cooperative, he let his guard down and put the knife down. He walked back and forth in the room, humming a song. After I took off my clothes, he slowly approached and rested his head against my chest. "Say that I will eat your heart." Upon hearing this, I was extremely horrified. I had guessed that the person might be somewhat perverted, but I never expected him to be this twisted. At that moment, I pretended to smile mockingly and calmly emphasized, "We are friends." While thinking of a way to get out of this difficult situation, I noticed that the apartment door was not locked. This was my chance. I pretended to make conversation, inviting him to the living room for a few drinks. Then I continued to the bathroom and waited until he was off guard. After coming out of the bathroom, taking advantage of his distraction, I landed a strong punch on his face. Then I dashed out the door and ran as fast as I could. Fortunately, I happened to see two police officers outside. After hearing my account, two officers followed him into the building and up to apartment 213 on the second floor. When they knocked on the door, a white man opened it. After being questioned, he admitted to the police that he was the one who had just handcuffed Tracy. Tea was on the bedside table. Since Tracy had mentioned that a white man had threatened him with a knife, the two officers were very cautious. They calmly entered the apartment to inspect. As the two officers entered the bedroom, they saw that the bedside drawer was slightly open. Glancing inside, they saw several photographs of dismembered human bodies. They believed that the photos were real. Immediately, they drew their guns and restrained the man, then called for backup. After subduing him, the two officers continued to thoroughly check the rooms. When they opened the refrigerator in the living room, they saw inside the freshly severed head of an African-American man. and several other body parts. Upon seeing his actions discovered, the man quickly confessed, "I did all those things, and I deserve to die." Shortly thereafter, forensic police quickly arrived at the scene and immediately sealed off the entire apartment, commencing the official investigation. Inside the apartment, on the kitchen counter, there was a large amount of human flesh that had been cooked. In addition to the heads, 2 hearts and a part of an arm were also found in the refrigerator. Other body parts were wrapped in plastic bags. The police found a total of 11 skull boxes, with 4 skull boxes in the living room and 7 skull boxes in the bedroom. Some skulls were bleached and some were painted. In the bedroom, there was a blue plastic bin. In the bin was a corrosive liquid along with several dismembered body parts belonging to 3 different men. Furthermore, the police also found 2 complete human skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 male genital parts, and many other body parts in the apartment. They also discovered a total of 74 photos documenting the dismemberment process of various victims. The crime scene was horrifying, almost beyond description in words. A forensic official in charge of the case later described it as more akin to a surgical museum than a crime scene. The identity of the man was quickly revealed. His name was Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His father, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, was a chemist. His mother, Joyce Annette, was a homemaker. After Jeffrey was born, his mother suffered from postpartum depression and spent most of her days in bed. His father, who had not completed his education at the time, spent much of his time at school. Both parents had little time to care for Jeffrey. As a child, Jeffrey was well-behaved and understanding. As he grew older, his mother's condition worsened, and she even had suicidal thoughts. Whenever his father came home, the couple would have heated arguments. Jeffrey's childhood was marked by witnessing his parents' intense arguments firsthand. In 1964, at the age of 4, Jeffrey underwent hernia surgery. Since then, he became withdrawn and unwilling to communicate with others. On one occasion, he saw his father conducting experiments with animal bones at home, which fascinated him greatly. From then on, he began searching for animal bones in the woods. Additionally, he often captured live animals and squeezed their bodies to determine the location of their bones. When the bones made a sound, he would be very excited. In October 1966, when Jeffrey was 6 years old, the family moved to Doylestown, Ohio, to live. The mother gave birth to Jeffrey's younger brother, named David. This was the name Jeffrey chose for his younger brother. Around the same time, the father found a job at a research institute in Ohio. Over the next 2 years, Jeffrey's family moved several times before finally settling in Bath, Summit County, Ohio. Their home was a 2-story house in a quiet forested area. Jeffrey was 8 years old at the time. He often wandered around and eventually discovered an abandoned wooden house in the woods. Jeffrey loved this house and turned it into his secret hideout. He frequently searched for and collected insects or small animals, keeping them in jars stored in his hideout. 2 years later, in 1970, when Jeffrey was 10 years old, during a family gathering, he noticed a pile of chicken bones left on the table. Curious, Jeffrey asked his father what would happen if those bones were placed in bleach. His father was pleased with his son's question and showed him how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. From then on, Jeffrey began collecting animal bones found on the road or in the woods, dissecting them to preserve their skeleton. On a few occasions, Jeffrey became dissatisfied with only finding small animal carcasses. Once, he even killed a dog himself, decapitated it, and impaled the head on a stick into the ground in the forest. He continued to nail the rest of the dog's body to a tree trunk. After completing this, he slowly admired his work of art. He even enthusiastically invited some friends over to see it, claiming he had stumbled upon it accidentally. In that same year, his mother's condition worsened. She attempted suicide several times, but was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's father was frequently absent due to a demanding job. It seemed Jeffrey had never felt parental love during his childhood, and he had grown accustomed to this. In 1974, at the age of 14, Jeffrey entered high school, time of rebellion for most teenagers, yet he received little attention from his parents, leading to feelings of despair and negativity. he started seeking solace in alcohol, often hiding it in his clothes when going to school. Jeffrey struggled with communication and had very few friends, yet he desperately craved attention. From a young age, he displayed behaviors such as imitating a seizure or collapsing and making sheep-like noises to attract others at school. These antics quickly earned him a reputation as a class clown. In the following days, Jeffrey continued to engage in various mischievous acts at school. Academically, he only enjoyed biology and was fascinated by animal dissection, showing no interest in other subjects. Despite being in his teens, he showed no interest in girls, but instead developed an attraction to men. During his school days, Jeffrey had a few boyfriends, but these relationships were short-lived. He began fantasizing about having a submissive boyfriend who would never leave him. One day, Jeffrey happened to see a muscular man jogging down the street. This sight excited him, and he desired a relationship with that man. A few days later, he armed himself with a baseball bat and hid in bushes, intending to attack the jogging man he had noticed earlier. However, the man never appeared. This was also Jeffrey's first attempt at committing a crime. 3 years later, in 1977, Jeffrey was preparing to graduate from high school, but his academic performance was very poor. This continued to affect his graduation. Concerned for him, his parents hired a private tutor for Jeffrey at home. During this time, his parents started arguing more frequently and sometimes even physically fighting. A year later, in 1978, their marriage also ended. At that time, Jeffrey had just turned 18 and was about to graduate from high school. He invited his mother to his graduation ceremony, but she declined, saying, "Your father being there is enough." Neither his father nor his mother showed much interest in him, but they still fought over custody of his younger brother, David. Eventually, his mother won the lawsuit and returned to Wisconsin with his younger brother, while Jeffrey lived with his father. A series of unhappy experiences continuously shocked Jeff. He felt his parents loved his younger brother, but not him. Jeffrey became addicted to alcohol and drowned himself in a drunken stupor until June 1978. 3 weeks after graduating from high school, while driving one day, he saw a shirtless man walking along the road. This greatly intrigued him. He slowly pulled over next to the man and asked if he needed a ride. The man gladly got into the car, and they engaged in conversation. Jeffrey learned the man's name was Stephen Mark Hicks, and he was heading to a concert in Lockwood Corners. Jeffrey suggested they have a few drinks at his place, since there was still time before the concert started. Stephen happily agreed. After they arrived at Jeffrey's house, they started drinking and chatting. During this time, Stephen often talked about some attractive women, but Jeffrey had no interest in women. He was only interested in Stephen himself. However, Jeffrey knew that if he proposed to be Stephen's boyfriend, he would likely be rejected. He felt deeply disappointed about that prospect. After a few hours of conversation, Stephen noticed it was almost time for the concert and asked to leave. But Jeffrey didn't want him to leave when he was off guard. He grabbed a 10-pound dumbbell and struck Stephen twice in the head, rendering him unconscious. Then, Jeffrey strangled him with the bar of the dumbbell. Afterward, he stripped Stephen's clothes off and engaged in sexual acts with his corpse. The next day, Jeffrey, curious, dissected his body under the basement of his house and buried it in the backyard. A few weeks later, he saw children playing in that area and felt unsafe. So he dug up the body, dissolved the flesh in strong acid, smashed the bones with a hammer into powder, and scattered them in the nearby woods. A month after the incident, in July 1978, Jeffrey's father returned home and found Jeffrey drinking all day. Concerned, he sought out connections to enroll Jeffrey at Ohio State University, renowned as a public Ivy, one of the top public universities in the Great Lakes region of the United States. During his time there, Jeffrey lacked interest in studying and continued his alcohol addiction. On one occasion, his father personally visited him at the dorm and found it filled with bottles of alcohol, deeply disappointing him. Eventually, Jeffrey dropped out of college after only 3 months. By January 1979, at the age of 19, Jeffrey enlisted in the U.S. Army at his father's suggestion to become a medic. During his military service, Jeffrey was deemed unfit for duty due to alcohol addiction and other issues, resulting in an early discharge. Fearing his father's disappointment if he returned home, on March 24, 1981, Jeffrey decided to move to Miami, Florida. He stayed temporarily at a local motel and found a job at a fast food restaurant on the beach. Outside of work, he spent most of his time drinking in his room. 6 months later, in September 1981, Jeffrey's father learned that his son had been discharged from the army but had not returned home. He called Jeffrey and demanded he come back to Ohio immediately. On returning home, Jeffrey continued living with his father and stepmother. 2 weeks after his return, he was arrested for 10 days for drunkenness and causing a disturbance. During this period, Jeffrey's father insisted that Jeffrey do all the household chores and pushed him to find additional employment, hoping to keep him busier and distract him from his drinking habit. However, this strategy did not yield much success. 3 months later, in December 1981, Jeffrey's father believed that Jeffrey listened well to his paternal grandmother, Jeffrey Dahmer. Since childhood, they had a close relationship, so his father decided to send Jeffrey to live with her in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He also asked Catherine to persuade Jeffrey to find stable employment and stop drinking. With no job prospects, after moving to his new residence, Jeffrey followed his grandmother's advice, helped with household chores, and occasionally attended church with her. By 1982, 1 year after moving in with her, Jeffrey found a job as a phlebotomist at a local blood plasma center. However, a few months later, on August 7, 1982, he was convicted of exposing himself in front of children and women. He was arrested by the police, fined $50, and subsequently fired by his employer. Over the next 2 years, Jeffrey relied on his grandmother's charity fund. By January 1985, at the age of 25, Jeffrey found another job as a beverage mixer at a local store. One day, while studying in the public library, he was handed a note by a man inquiring if he was interested in finding a gay man. Jeffrey stared at the note silently without responding, but it awakened a long-suppressed craving within him. From then on, Jeffrey no longer wanted to suppress himself and began frequenting gay bars and bathhouses. Once he stole a male mannequin from a store and hid it in his closet, only to be discovered by his grandmother, who demanded he throw it away. Every night, he would bring home a male acquaintance from the bar to spend the night. However, during each encounter, Jeffrey felt uncomfortable as his partner constantly moved, making him unable to control him. Jeffrey wanted complete control over his partner, so he came up with a plan. Every time he brought someone home, he would drug their drink or food and wait until they were asleep before initiating intimacy. This way, his partner wouldn't be able to move freely, and he could do whatever he pleased to dominate them, absolutely. However, this is not the key point. His twisted and sick thoughts are becoming worse. Once he read in the newspaper about the death of an 18-year-old young man. On learning the burial place of the teenager, he took a shovel and went to the cemetery late at night, intending to dig up the body to experience a peculiar pleasure. However, after digging for a while, he found the ground too hard and reluctantly abandoned the insane idea. On September 8, 1985, Jeffrey was once again convicted for exposing himself in public. He was sentenced to 1 year of probation in November 1987. Jeffrey, then 27 years old, happened to meet a man named Stephen Tuomi from Michigan. Jeffrey invited him to a hotel, spiked his drink with a sedative, and waited until he was unconscious before engaging in intercourse. The next morning, upon waking up, Jeffrey found Stephen lying motionless beside him with bruises on his chest and blood coming from his mouth. He was no longer breathing. Jeffrey didn't intend to kill him but couldn't undo what had happened. Therefore, he decided to buy a large suitcase to pack the body and took it to his grandmother's house to hide it for a while. Crazy thoughts started brewing in Jeffrey's mind. A week later, he dismembered the body in the basement of his grandmother's house. He cut the body into pieces and put them in plastic bags, then used a hammer to smash the bones into small fragments. The entire process took him 2 hours. Jeffrey disposed of all the body parts except the head, which he threw into the trash. 2 weeks later, he used Soilex, an alkaline industrial detergent mixed with bleach, to cook the head, then removed all the meat and kept the skull. but he noticed that the skull became very brittle after handled that way and will break easily if handled in that way. Not being careful, he decided to crush the skull and throw it away. 2 months later, on January 16, 1988, he found another target and met a man named James Dockstader. The third victim was in a bar. He invited him to his house to take pictures for $50. He still used the old method of giving the victim alcohol and drugs and then strangling him to death. He used the same method to dispose of the body and leave only the head, which he then reprocessed and finally bleached into a skull for display. After all, he still felt dissatisfied with what he had done. Next time he used the same trick to commit more crimes. The victims were all gay men he met in a bar. After many experiences, he successfully preserved the victim's box. Because most of the skulls were bleached, some were painted with mixed patterns and colors. In April 1988, 28-year-old Jeffrey lured a man home again. However, this time he made a small noise in the house. In the room, he was just about to kill the man above when his grandmother's voice rang out from outside the door. "Is that you?" Jeffrey, after hearing his grandmother's call, he felt that if he killed that man, the man on his grandmother's body might be discovered, so he gave up killing and secretly threw him away. I'm in front of the hospital at midnight 5 months later because of frequent drinking and frequent carrying. Friends go home. At night, his room often smells unpleasant. Grandma couldn't stand it, so she angrily kicked him out of the house. Next, he rented an apartment in an apartment complex on North 24th Street, north of Milwaukee, until September 1988, when, after moving into an apartment, he was charged with using drugs and luring a 13-year-old boy for sex after being arrested by police. A psychologist conducted the evaluation. A psychologist diagnosed him with schizoid personality disorder. He was said to be impulsive, lacking trust in others, and lacking faith in life. In January 1989, 4 months later, Jeffrey's trial began, resulting in his conviction for second-degree sexual assault. However, sentencing was delayed until May 1989. During this period, he was held in custody. In March 1989, he was granted a 10-day Easter furlough and returned home to his family. Unexpectedly, just 5 days after being released on March 25, 1989, he murdered another victim, 24-year-old biracial model named Anthony Sears, making him the 5th victim. The morning after his grandmother wasn't home, he moved the body from the basement to the bathtub, dismembered it, and placed the body parts into plastic bags to preserve them, later storing them in a wooden box. 2 months later, on May 23, 1989, he was sentenced to 5 years probation. Initially, he spent 1 year in prison, but was released after 2 months due to good behavior and moved in with his grandmother. By May 14, 1990, at the age of 30, Jeffrey was again evicted from his grandmother's house, this time with his collection of human body parts. He then moved into an apartment on North 25th Street, apartment 23, in Milwaukee. Over the next 2 years, he lived freely without supervision, successfully committing 12 murders without detection. Each time he lured men to his apartment under the pretext of paying them for nude photos. After satisfying his impulses, he dismembered the bodies. He kept the skulls as trophy, creating a macabre decoration collection at home. Once, he even tried to microwave a skull to dry it out, but it exploded. Over time, Jeffrey moved away from strangulation, instead drilling holes in victims' heads and injecting acid or boiling water, believing it would render them submissive and compliant, albeit barely conscious. He thought this method would give him complete control over his victim. On the afternoon of May 26, 1991, he invited a 14-year-old immigrant boy named Konarak Synthesonphone, 13th victim, to his house to take pictures. After taking pictures, he drugged the boy's drink and waited until he passed out. He then drilled a hole in the boy's head and injected Maxit into his frontal lobe. He then dragged the boy into his bedroom. In his bedroom, there was still the body of a man who had died 3 days earlier and had not been dismembered. That day, for unknown reasons, he suddenly lost interest. So he left the apartment and went to a bar to drink. Early in the morning, he returned to the apartment and was surprised to find the boy, who had just been injected with acid, naked, chatting with 3 girls downstairs. Quickly walked over put his arm around the boy's shoulder, and said that the boy was my boyfriend and I would take him away right now. 3 girls did not believe him and called the police. After a while, 2 policemen arrived at the apartment. Jeffrey appeared very calm and said that Konarak is my 19-year-old boyfriend. We had just had a few drinks. He must have been a little drunk and lost control, so he ran out of the house. But the 3 girls were confused because he had blood on him and did not seem drunk. However, the policemen did not believe the girls and told them to mind their own business. Not long after, 3 paramedics arrived at the scene and checked the boy's injuries. One of them suggested taking the boy to the hospital for immediate treatment, but the policemen did not support their suggestion, so they left. Another policeman arrived at the scene, and the 3 took the unconscious boy back to apartment 213. After entering the apartment, they smelled a very strange smell. One policeman did a preliminary check inside the apartment, found nothing to prove his relationship with the boy. Jeffrey showed the police a nude, secret photo he had just taken with the boy in the afternoon. So the police believed his story and left the apartment after the police left. He felt so angry when the boy escaped that he continued to inject more acid into the boy. He took the head and killed the boy the next day. He asked his boss for a day off, spend time at home cutting up the boy's body. However, this was not a scary thing after killing his opponents. He would keep their hearts and livers and put them in the refrigerator to enjoy gradually during the 2 years he lived here. He was often complained by the neighbors because of the unpleasant smell coming from the apartment. Sometimes the neighbors even heard the sound of an electric saw, but every time they knocked on the door, he made up some excuse to defend himself until the last time he was discovered, killed a total of 17 people. The youngest was 14 years old and the oldest was 36 years old. All of them were African Americans, Asians, and Hispanic immigrant. At that time, problem of racial discrimination in America was very serious. Milwaukee is an industrial city with a large foreign immigrant population, which may be why Jeffrey's target didn't get much attention at the time, causing much anger among many locals. The 3 police officers who helped Jeffrey take the immigrant boy back to his apartment were probably also racists, so they were hesitant to believe him after seeing that Jeffrey was white. Jeffrey was charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder, but he only admitted to 16 of those charges. Following a racially charged incident, public outrage against Jeffrey was intense. On January 13, 1992, the trial officially began. To prevent riots, dozens of security personnel used shields that emitted tear gas to keep the crowds at bay. Surprisingly, Jeffrey recanted his confession in court and pleaded not guilty. He claimed, "I confessed during police interrogation because I was suffering from a mental disorder and couldn't control myself." His defense attorney argued that Jeffrey suffered from a mental disorder that impaired his ability to control his actions when committing these crimes. In closing arguments, prosecutor asserted that Jeffrey was entirely rational and in control of his actions when committing the crime. However, he had murdered his victims and kept their bodies solely for his own gratification and control. His crimes caused significant distress and damage to the people of Milwaukee. The trial lasted for 4 months. On May 1, 1992, the jury unanimously reached a verdict after deliberation, sentencing Jeffrey Dahmer to 16 life imprisonments, with an additional 941 years in prison. The charge relating to Stephen Tuomi, the second victim among the 17 counts of first-degree murder, was dismissed because Jeffrey claimed he did not remember killing him. He stated,
"One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists."
And you have no memory
I
of it?
have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
After his sentencing, he was imprisoned at Columbia Correctional Institution, one of Wisconsin's maximum security prisons, housing over 800 male inmates. Upon beginning his sentence, Jeffrey was initially kept in solitary confinement. Later, to better adapt to prison life, prison administration allowed him to interact with other prisoners and participate in prison work. He requested a Bible from the guards, which was granted. He read the Bible daily and confessed his sins. During an interview with a reporter, he responded that
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
when asked why the first crime occurred in 1978 and the second crime occurred 9 years later, he explained that
it just wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then.
in Jeffrey's memory, he stated that he was always driven by the inner evil and did not know how to escape from it. When asked why he wanted to preserve the skulls of his victims, he replied that he was creating an altar and drawing a draft in which there is a table. Each head of the table has a candle and 10 heads in the middle. This plan was recently planned for him. In the next 6 months, if not arrested by police, he will finish the altar. When asked which gods the altar worships, he replied, "It's me, where I meditate and gain power." On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey and 2 other prisoners entered the bathroom to scrub. They stayed there for 20 minutes without any movement, and the guard went in to check. At that point, they found Jeffrey and another prisoner lying unconscious on the floor. Both had head injuries. They were quickly taken to the emergency hospital. Jeffrey was pronounced dead an hour later due to unsuccessful resuscitation efforts, and the other prisoner died 2 days later. The perpetrator of the attack was Christopher Scarver, who suffers from schizophrenia. He said, "God told me to do it, and I'm just fulfilling God's will." That day, he hid an iron bar in his clothes and attacked them while they were unsuspecting. Jeffrey didn't even resist or make a sound when attacked. Jeffrey was extremely cruel and committed heinous crimes that shook the world when exposed. In an interview, he once said, "I don't know whether God and the devil exist or not, but I think both are influencing me." The story of the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer concludes here. If you enjoyed it and want to support us, please like and comment with the number 1. This will motivate me to create more podcast episodes about criminal investigations to share with you. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss any future episodes. I'm looking forward to sharing more thrilling and captivating stories with you. Thank you so much for listening and supporting. I wish you a great day and see you in the upcoming podcast episodes. Remember, all your feedback is invaluable and a great motivation for me to continue this journey. Goodbye, and see you soon.